Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question is, can I analyze Joe Biden's July 2024 interview with George Stephanopoulos? Just a reminder, I'm not diagnosing anybody in this video, only speculating about what could be happening in a situation like this. If you enjoyed this video, please like it, subscribe to my channel, and consider supporting me on Patreon. I will put the link to Patreon in the description for this video. First, I'll look at the background of this case, move to a summary of the interview, then offer my analysis. During the afternoon of Friday, July 5, 2024, ABC News recorded a 22-minute interview with Joe Biden. The interview was aired at 8 p.m. that same day, without being edited. It featured George Stephanopoulos asking Joe Biden a series of questions about topics like the presidential debate on June 27, 2024, and Joe's cognitive limitations. Here is a summary of the interview. George's first question was about the debate. He asked Joe Biden if the poor performance was just an episode or a sign of a more serious condition. Joe responded that it was a bad episode. He was exhausted and did not listen to his instincts as far as preparing. George pointed out that Joe had 6 days in Camp David to rest before the debate. Why wasn't this enough time to recover? Joe claimed that he was sick and feeling terrible. Physicians who examined him determined he had a really bad cold. George asked Joe if he watched the debate. He replied, "I don't think I did, no." When asked if he knew how badly the debate was going, Joe offered a rambling response about polling numbers and claimed that Donald Trump lied 28 times before taking responsibility for the poor performance. He indicated that he just had a bad night, but then blamed his opponent, saying that Donald was shouting even after the microphone was turned off. This distracted Joe and made him realize he was not in control. George then quoted an article in the New York Times, which talked about how people who had spent time with Joe Biden over the last few months said his lapses have become increasingly frequent, pronounced, and worrisome. He asked Joe if he was the same man today that he was when he took office 3.5 years ago. Sidestepping the question completely, Joe offered yet another rambling response, talking about how he expanded NATO, grew the economy, and took on Big Pharma. George then focused the interview back on the troubling lapses that Joe has been experiencing. Joe claimed that his physician said he was exhausted. At this point, George asked a critical question. Have you had a full neurological and cognitive evaluation? Joe claimed that he was given a full neurological test every day. When George pressed specifically about cognitive testing, Joe replied, "No. No one said I had to. No one said. They said I'm good." George asked if Joe would be willing to undergo cognitive testing. Joe indicated that he had a cognitive test every single day. He was running the world. Stating that he understood that, George reworded the same question. Joe replied, "Well, I've already done it." The next question George had was, "Can you serve effectively for the next 4 years?" Joe Biden once again offered a rambling response, talking about how he accomplished various goals like inventing the computer chip. George reworded the same question. Joe said, "I believe so," and then talked about the importance of a president's character. George asked if Joe was being honest with himself regarding his ability to defeat Donald Trump. Joe was behind in the polls before the debate. Now he's even further behind. Joe replied, "You guys keep saying that." He then talked about how he was going to win despite the polling data. Joe claimed the polls actually indicated the race was a toss-up. He simply did not believe he was behind. George pointed out that people have accused Donald Trump of only being out for himself. How is Joe Biden different? Joe indicated the critics were wrong and then talked for a while about how bad Donald Trump was. When Joe was asked if he convinced himself he was the only person who could defeat Donald Trump, Joe claimed he was the most qualified. He will only drop out of the race if the Lord Almighty comes down and tells him. George mentioned how many key Democrats have been having discussions about Joe dropping out of the race. Would Joe give up if they approached him and said they were concerned about a defeat? Joe said, "I'm not going to answer the question. It's not going to happen." Toward the end of the interview, Joe talked about how he draws big crowds and his campaign has received millions of dollars in contributions. He doesn't believe his approval rating is actually 36%, and he is the only person who can hold NATO together. Now moving to my analysis. Here are my thoughts on a few areas that stood out to me in this case. Item number 1. When Joe was asked if he watched the presidential debate, he responded, "I don't think I did, no." This answer is peculiar considering how the debate took place just over a week before the interview. Did he watch it or not? This is not a hard question. Sometimes when people are lying, they offer responses that leave them the flexibility to maneuver on a later occasion. They are concerned about getting caught in a lie and want to keep an escape route open. Another possibility here is that Joe really doesn't remember. Either way, it doesn't look good for him. Item number 2. One of the most worrisome points in the interview is how Joe Biden addressed the cognitive testing issue. It's clear that he needs to take one of these tests. Not only is Joe's behavior consistent with poor memory functioning, he appears to be getting worse. Any reasonable person in his position would be concerned and want to take the test. Most cognitive tests don't even take 15 minutes to complete, and they're painless. They simply involve a series of questions. Initially, Joe sidestepped the question about cognitive testing and went on a tangent. When pressed, he admitted that he didn't take a cognitive test, but claimed the test wasn't indicated, and clinicians told him he was good. He concluded his frustrating series of answers by implying that his work performance was the same thing as taking a cognitive test. In a way, he's right. The problem is he's failing the test every day. If the debate was a test, did Joe pass? There are a few reasons that Joe may not want to take a cognitive test. Perhaps he believes that his functioning is fine, or he doesn't want to take the test because he knows exactly what the result will be. Item number 3. During the interview, Joe tried to focus attention on Donald Trump, suggesting he was a pathological liar and talking about restoring decency to the office. The strategy here was to move the discussion away from Joe's pronounced cognitive limitations. Like, Joe may not understand what he's doing, but at least he's not deceptive like Donald Trump. Joe Biden has integrity. This tactic is problematic because Joe is not demonstrating integrity by denying his obvious and alarming limitations. Furthermore, during the debate, Joe lied as well, several times. In a curious way, Joe is becoming more like Donald Trump, except with the added problem of the cognitive limitations. This brings me to item number 4. Joe Biden appears to be adopting tactics used by Donald Trump. For example, without using the term fake news, he suggested that's what the polling data represented. He repeatedly denied the reality of the results. Joe referred to drawing big crowds when he gives a speech, referenced huge campaign money, and sidestep questions. It's clear that Joe is frustrated with the media and blamed the press for exposing his cognitive limitations. The mainstream media leans to the left, and Joe Biden has enjoyed this advantage for a long time. Now, in order to make sure Donald Trump is defeated, the media has turned against Joe Biden. For the first time, Joe is learning what it feels like to be in Donald Trump's situation as far as the media. Joe must now run his campaign without their assistance, and he's not happy about it. If Joe wants to be like Donald, then he needs to capture the entire experience, which includes fighting a hostile media. Item number 5. Joe indicated that he would not drop out unless he was commanded to do so by God. Is this something that happens often for presidential candidates? Messages directly from God? By putting this condition in place, Joe is being defiant and proclaiming he will never drop out. This is an extreme tactic to adopt and leads me to believe that Joe feels cornered and pressured. He understands the walls are closing in and he is lashing out in response. His desperation is clear. It has been reported in the media that a tight inner circle of supporters, including Jill Biden and Hunter Biden, have been encouraging Joe to stay in the race. Is Hunter a good choice as an advisor under the circumstances? Asking Hunter Biden for career advice is like letting Harvey Weinstein run an HR department or trusting O.J. Simpson to manage your divorce. Perhaps Joe Biden needs to talk to a wider circle of people. Moving to item number 6, what do I think happened in this case? This is just a theory, my opinion. It is not unusual for people to experience cognitive limitations as they grow older. Here are some of the common symptoms: trouble following or participating in a conversation, using vague or nonspecific language, struggling to find the right words or calling things by the wrong name, difficulty remembering recent events or conversations, losing track of thoughts in mid-sentence, departing on tangents, having pressured speech, irritability and anxiety, having an increased level of distrust or even becoming paranoid, and exercising poor judgment. Based on the available information, Joe Biden appears to be experiencing difficulty with cognition. During the ABC News interview, Joe performed better as far as putting together sentences and being coherent, but his defensiveness, defiance, and denial placed him in an untenable position. Joe has just enough cognitive functioning to blame others, but not enough to be competent. There is no way to know if Joe is simply experiencing denial or if he is delusional. One could argue that a delusion looks a lot like a prolonged and pathological version of denial. Perhaps the difference could be considered academic in this case because the effect is identical. In a strange twist, Joe Biden has become like a lower functioning version of his opponent, and his cognitive limitations have now become Donald Trump's greatest ally. Those are my thoughts on the interview with Joe Biden. Please put any opinions and thoughts in the comment section. They consistently generate an interesting dialogue. As always, I hope you found my analysis of this topic to be informative. Thanks for watching.